it's Sebastian Torres. So I was recently watching the new MonsterVerse film and it got me inspired to see if I could actually make something like it in Blender using purely just assets that I download off the internet. And all in all, I think it worked out pretty well. So I'm going to show you the process of how I got this done, and that way you'll be able to play around with it and do it yourself as well. Now, due to licensing, I can't really give away the King Kong model or the buildings, but I can show you where to get them. In terms of the King Kong, it's actually a free model. You can also get Godzilla if you're interested in that. And for the buildings, while these ones are paid for, you can get free alternatives from Blendswap, and that way you can rebuild this entire scene if you're interested in doing something similar. Now, if we head over to CG Trader, I'm going to actually leave the link to this model in the description below. It's the Kong 2021 free 3D model. It comes fully textured and rigged, so then that way you can jump straight into Blender and start using it. Now, it does have some limitations. Obviously, it's not the highest resolution textures, so if you get in nice and close like you saw in my intro video, you might start seeing it kind of break apart, but it's not always the case. The good thing about it is it comes with its own hair system. That way when you use it, it has really good interaction with the lighting. Now, while the topology may seem a little bit simple, it actually moves really well when it comes to animating. You could even put a muscle system underneath this to make it interact properly. And also this model, it has other models that you can check out. For instance, a Godzilla, which from what I can tell is extremely good quality. So yeah, the good thing about this is that you're able to use these. Obviously you can't use it commercially because it is Godzilla and King Kong. Clearly that's not something you can do, but you can use them for like your artwork like I did in this one, so that's pretty cool. So all you need to do is click on the free download. It takes a few seconds and then you'll be able to download the file. Now that we're in Blender, we can get rid of pretty much everything. And we'll go to File, Append, and we'll find our King Kong. So let's double click on the file we downloaded, and we're going to need the collections, and it's going to have 4 collections. Let's add all of them. And as you can see, when it appends it, this thing is gigantic. So it comes with both King Kong and also the axe. So we can move the axe aside or we can delete it. I'm not really going to use it for the animation, so I just got rid of it. But just make sure that you come over here and delete it from this delete hierarchy, so you don't have any excess things that you don't need. And as you can see, it's rigged with Rigify, which is great because it's easy to use, but unfortunately when it comes to retargeting, it's a bit of a pain, I've noticed. But it's a really good rig. Obviously, if you've got a little bit more experience than me when it comes to animating, you probably find it a little bit easier than I do. But all in all, it wasn't too difficult to play around with. So you can even close the hands if you want. And so now it's just a matter of posing it however you want. The good thing about this is the facial rig is actually pretty comprehensive. So the person who made it didn't really skimp out when it comes to the facial rig. As you can see, when I move the eye sockets move perfectly. We can control the mouth, the nose, the jaw. And it's fully modeled in the mouth as well, so you've got quite a bit of detail there. Now, as you can probably see, it doesn't have any of the fur when you first open it up. Let's try and render it. It's with Eevee, so it shouldn't take too long. So I'm going to add a camera. Now, you'll notice that with Eevee, your hair's going to look terrible and so are the eyes. If you recall back in the original page where we downloaded it, it said that this only works using cycles. So let's switch over to cycles. And just so it doesn't get stuck, let's just go over there and reduce this to, actually reduce the render to 512, and we'll put this at 0.95. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit slow when it comes to rendering this much hair, so just keep in mind for the intro that I showed you, each frame took roughly between 2.5 to about 3.5 minutes. And then you can probably see in the original video, there's quite a few fireflies. And so that's just noise because I had the samples so low. Obviously, if you're going to do this for a feature film, you'd want to pump up those samples and also the noise threshold, really drop that as much as possible. So if you can do something like a 10-minute render on each frame, it'll probably be better quality for a feature film or like, a short film or whatever. But for a YouTube video that only took me 2 days, it's actually not bad. There we go. So now as you can see, the actual quality of the hair is pretty decent. So it's really well groomed. As you can tell, the eyes, you got quite a bit of detail. In the version that I did, because it was nighttime, there wasn't a lot of detail in the eyes. But if you do this like in a much more lit up sort of setting, you can get a lot more detail in the eyes. So once you have King Kong ready to go and you want to start animating him, you want to know what it is that he's walking around. So you need to create an actual world for him to interact with. So in my asset browser, you'll notice that I've got a whole bunch of buildings, and these are all from the Blender market. You can download free buildings from something like Blendswap and use those. Sometimes they're good quality, sometimes not so much. The reason why I prefer to use bought ones from the Blender market is because you can see the quality of the buildings. In some cases, for instance, like this building here, you'll see that it's highlighting the ground plane, which is great because it tells us exactly where this building is going to be. Now, the other good thing is because it's a procedural building, and you can see that we have control over how many floors it's got, the depth, as in like how wide, and then we can also go up. And the great thing is with these buildings, if they're really well made, sometimes they'll have actual lights. So sometimes you'll see some of the actual interiors light up. You can also have raindrops, wet surfaces, snow, which is fantastic. And I'll show you exactly where you can find this add-on. Again, I'm not sponsored by either one of these things, but I just think they're really great to have because this way you don't have to model things yourself, which does tend to be a little bit of a pain. It takes way too much time. So if you want to really populate a world really quickly, this is the way to go about it. Again, you don't have to buy this. You can use free options. In the Blender market, this is the actual city pack that I used. And the great thing about it is it comes with a whole bunch of things you can use to actually build your city out. It's not just buildings, it's everything. It's roads, it's light poles, stairs, everything. Literally everything you could possibly imagine that you need to create a city, this thing has it. And it's really well detailed as well. So the actual textures themselves, the way that you can modify them, it's quite insane. Using one of these packs, you're really going to save a lot of time. I mean, look at this. To create this from scratch, it would take you so long, so many hours. And this is really quick. As you can see here, it's actually adding the snow. It's amazing detail. You can even automate the streetlights with something like this. And just like this one, there's quite a few on Blender Market that you can use. It's not just this one. There's a few different ones that you can play around with. You can even mix and match the buildings, which is something that I do sometimes because I've bought quite a few different ones. And that way you can just populate a world using different ones. So it doesn't always look like the same buildings over and over again. As for free options, you can come over to Blendswap, and most of these are pretty decent detailed buildings. So as you can see, you've got sci-fi buildings, realistic buildings, even fire escapes. There's quite a few options, even houses really. And the good thing about this is for the most part, most of these are free to use. So if you need to use them for commercial work, you can. Some of them you'll need to really check out the licensing just in case you can't. But if you're going to use it just to practice, this is a great option because you don't have to pay for anything. And it's just a matter of using these instead of the paid ones. They don't always have the ability to change them like procedurally, but you know, if you just use this to fill in the background, that's actually pretty decent detail. There's plenty of free options. You don't need to just go through the Blender Market route. Back in Blender, this is the actual file that I used for the intro video that you saw. I didn't create anything other than the files that you see here. There isn't any ground. In the original video, you don't see the ground, so there's no point in actually making it. Now, if I was going to see the ground, then it's something that I'd worry about then, but I purposely picked this angle, so then that way I don't have to worry about creating the ground. We've even got his foot over here kind of hiding or obscuring the ground, and you'll actually notice I kind of hid this in the final render, but if I go back here, when he's raising his head, you'll notice that he clips right through the building. And so what I did was I actually rendered this separately. That way I can just put it over him and it looks like he's actually going up behind it. It's a good little cheat in case you kind of screw up your animation. Because if I had pushed him back too far, then it would have looked a lot smaller in the screen. So then this way, he looks pretty decently big. That's the whole thing. I was going for that Gareth Edwards sort of mentality when it came to Godzilla, where he figured, all right, if the character's way too big to fit in the scene, then That way it'll look like monstrously huge. Whereas if you have him dead center in the frame and you can see the whole thing, then what's the point? Like, he just looks like a monkey at that point, right? Or in Godzilla's case, he just looks like a lizard. It doesn't look gigantic. Yeah, he's got tiny little buildings around him and stuff, but it doesn't give you that that emotional hit of holy crap, there's a building, I know basically the scale of that. There's a road, I know the basic scale of that. And then there's this gigantic thing in the back just freaking raising out of the fire, So that's really something to think about when you're trying to create these scenes, is how can I make this character not just look like he's a 8 foot tall or 7 foot tall monkey. I want him to look like he's immense. He's so big that he doesn't even fit in the camera. The cameraman didn't have enough time to kind of catch up with the shot and be like, oh shit, I got to frame this perfectly and have him dead center in the frame. So as you can see, he just looks insanely big in the shot. And I'm pretty certain, yep, so he clips through that building as well. So he basically clips through both of the buildings. I could have actually pushed his arm back, but during the animation, because of the way that his arm moves, or the way that I wanted his arm to move, I didn't want it to be kind of going back too far. So these are kind of little cheats that you can use when it comes to VFX. Everyone thinks that everything has to look perfect in the shot, like in the 3D scene, everything has to look perfect. But you'll actually see, if you watch a lot of behind the scenes VFX breakdowns, and even things like Pixar, you'll notice that they cheat a lot. So in order to create the perfect shot, sometimes you just have to cheat it. And as long as it looks good from the camera's point of view, that's all that matters, really. And there's the background that you see in the actual video. I didn't actually model all the buildings because that was going to take forever, and I just figured it's going to be blurred out in the background. It's not really worth it. So I went into Pixabay or Pexels. It was one of those two. I'm pretty sure it's Pexels. And these photos you can download for free. You can use them for wherever you want. So they're royalty free. I just made sure to find a photo that the actual angle of the buildings matched the angle of the camera. It does and it doesn't. It's not 100% perfect, but it's fine because most of them are going to be blurred out in the background anyways. So I'll use things to obscure it, like King Kong. Now, one thing that I'd like to touch base on is this floor plane here, which is not actually a floor plane. So what this is actually an emission object. I had the issue where I wanted to actually light him from beneath. So I kept on using area lights, the sun lamp, a whole bunch of different things. But the problem with that is trying to get an area light or even a point light to interact with the character properly and give him that kind of flickering sort of light that you'd get from fire. It was not going to work. It didn't look realistic. You can put a noise filter on it or a modifier onto the actual light, but it flickers in a very unnatural sort of way. So what I did was I downloaded this fire element. As you can see, it's kind of got that ethereal sort of, it moves like it's an actual organic sort of thing. And this way I can add it to the actual plane, and it doesn't have to be high resolution. As you can see, it looks like crap there, but what it does do is it reflects on the character perfectly. So it kind of adds that shimmering sort of fiery look. This is what comes out of Blender. And you can tell that it hasn't been denoised yet. There's quite a few fireflies. And the other thing is, when I added that light panel that I was showing you, it illuminates him perfectly from beneath. You can tell that the actual hair is interacting with the light perfectly. But the other thing that is good, when it comes to the shadows here, you'll notice that as soon as he comes out, he's kind of covering the light. So he's kind of hunched over the light. So when he moves back, or when he raises himself, that light then hits on this, and instead of it just being a big shadow, you can see that it kind of goes orangey, so it really interacts with the rest of the scene. It kind of happens here, but not completely, because you'll notice that this rooftop doesn't really take on that spill. I'm not really worried about that though, because once we start adding our fire elements and whatever, that's pretty much just going to be sort of orangey. And so what we need now is, in our compositor, we need to set it up so it gives us the actual layers that we need. So let's go here to the view layers, and you'll notice that I've got combined the Z. Some people use the mist. I actually prefer to use the Z. I get better results with it. I don't know, but the mist is kind of, you can use it I guess, but I don't really like it. You've got the vector. The vector is actually really important because without the vector, you don't have motion blur, and I don't want to actually render it with motion blur. I prefer to add it in afterwards. Sometimes you can do it directly in Blender. It takes a little bit longer, and I don't find that the results really are that much better than added in post than doing them in Blender. I find it it's kind of the same, really. And so we also need denoising data. That one's important because you saw the fireflies, it goes crazy, and you don't want that. There's quite a few options here when it comes to lighting. For instance, you can do emission, ambient occlusion, shadow catches, even crypto mats. I didn't use any of these, even though I had it set up here. To set this up is really easy. All you need to do is add a file output, and you'll see when you first add it, it doesn't have anything at all. All it has is the path, and then you just plug in a picture. But because we're going to do OpenEXR multi-layer, we need quite a few layers. And just go through it, changing the names. So for instance, let's see, we're doing combined. So you can change that to combined. You can put the Z one in there as well. You just need to double click on it and just start writing. As for color management, I like to do the override and ACES CG. Okay, and so what you'll need to do is you just need to start plugging them in. So you got the alpha, you got your depth, your vector, denoising. Obviously, I've got quite a few extra ones in here in case I need it. So the ambient occlusion, shadow catcher, the cryptos, denoise I do use, and then a couple of other ones including emission. And I've also got some other options here, obviously. So I've got the combined, but just in case I needed the separate colors, I've actually separated it with a separate color and then fed it into their own layers. You don't need to do that, but sometimes you'll need it if you're trying to do like really good chromatic sort of displacement, and you want like some, like, you know, maybe you want one of the color channels to be slightly bigger to give you that chromatic aberration. And if you don't know what chromatic aberration is, I'll actually show you what that means. If you don't know what chromatic aberration is, the most basic way I can say is when the light comes into your actual lens, it actually splits apart into the 3 different light channels. And if the lens isn't properly calibrated, sometimes the aberration or the split of the colors can be a little bit too much, and you'll start noticing kind of like a color fringing. I'll show you what that means as well. This is an extreme case of chromatic aberration, and then that way you get kind of colored fringing. And you can probably see it here in the corners, the colors kind of split. So it's kind of like a blurring effect where the colors actually separate. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would I want that? Why would I want my image to not be absolutely perfect the way that it renders out of Blender? And the thing is, if it's too perfect, it looks too plastic, it looks too CGI, and we need to add those imperfections as if it was actually filmed on a set. And if you're filming it with lenses, you're going to have chromatic aberration. Even the best of lenses tend to have those little quirks. One of the things that I didn't actually mention is that these images, or these image planes that I've put back here, are actually set to emit. So if you look here, the base color is actually black, and I've put that actual image into the emission node and set that to 1. And so that way, what will happen is when King Kong's fur actually interacts with this, or even like his fur with this one, he'll grab sort of those colors, and so it'll kind of, in a certain sense, it'll act like a light on his fur, and it'll interact with it a little bit better. So that way it kind of really cements him into the scene, as opposed to it just being all lights around him. I prefer using this method. You could use different lights if, you know, you need certain accents. For instance, if I really wanted to light up his face, I could have just put a light in front of his face, light up his eyes and whatever. But I really wasn't interested in that. I wanted to look really menacing, so having the blacks of his eyes sort of really stand out it was better for what I was going for. I've kind of wrapped them around, and you can actually create a HDRI using HDRI Maker and just use something like that. But I found that this was better because I was going to use this image as the background anyways, so I figured might as well put the same image back here, and really it's just going to work with reflections. It's not really going to be really highly detailed. It's not going to reflect off the buildings perfectly anyways. And so once you're really done with that, here's another thing that I like to do is I'm always using cycles when it comes to something like this. And if you're just playing around, it's not really something serious. Like if it's a movie, you probably don't want to do this. You probably want to go a little bit higher. But I go with 360 samples, and the noise threshold, I got to put it at 0.001. And sometimes I'll use the denoise. I don't really like to do it in here. It does save the denoising information anyway, so then that way you can denoise it in post. And if you come down here to the view transform, make sure to have this at AGX, not standard or filmic. Both of those not what you want. Another little thing that I did in order to add a little bit of realism is you'll see that I added a whole bunch of these details. Obviously this is not how that would be set up. Why would they have police barricades in front of this? Why wouldn't this be right next to each other or right at the end? It just depends on how it looks from the camera's point of view. You kind of have to fudge it a little bit and move it around just so it looks better from the camera's point of view. You'll also notice that I dropped a whole bunch of rubbish here so it doesn't look perfectly clean. I could have gone even more really, because they're kind of, just imagine he's fighting Godzilla and there's meant to be crap everywhere, but just to add a little bit of life to it so it's not just a dead sort of thing. And once you're done, you can click render and we'll go into DaVinci Resolve. Once we come into DaVinci Resolve, this is where the magic actually happens. It's not in Blender, because the problem with Blender is when you're rendering things out, it looks 3D. It looks like it's a video game basically. And so you need to use DaVinci Resolve in order to make it look as realistic as possible. Now, does this look like it could probably be in a cinematic film? Probably not, but if I spent enough time with it, used the right kind of assets, then I could probably get it to that point. Maybe a higher resolution model would come in handy where the skin is actually textured much better and you have the subsurf scattering, you've got the veins inside the skin. Then it will really help really bring that realism to the image. But for now, you'll notice that the first time you actually load your file, there's usually nothing going on. It's not going to even look like this. Sometimes it'll have none in all of the channels. So you load it up, go to your channels, and you'll see that it actually has none. But they're all in there. They're all rendered out. As you can see, I've got quite a few channels in there. And so what I like to do is just make sure that I've got the right one. So go composite, and for velocity, just scroll down to the bottom and you want the vector X and the vector Y. And that'll come in handy later because you're going to use the vectors in order to create a vector motion blur. So it creates a post motion blur. My node tree is a little bit of a mess. So there's a lot going on. So with the first stage, what I've done is I've added this fire effect. Let's play it so it's just a fire. There you go. It's kind of like slowed down a little bit. That way it looks much bigger than what it actually is. So adding this flame, you'll see that it actually comes behind here. And I've used an X-Glow. You'll need a reactor. So you can actually Google this. Google reactor for DaVinci Resolve. And you can install that in a couple of minutes and download certain things. For instance, X-Glow is on there and it's amazing. And so it gives you the perfect kind of glow when it comes to fire, because if it doesn't have that sort of really white hot sort of thing, like in your merge node, when you use screen, it doesn't look great. So if I get rid of the X, it doesn't really look like that intense. It looks like, oh yeah, it's just a thing that was stuck on there. But as soon as you add that, then it adds the kind of like glow around it. It really makes it white hot. It looks like it's insanely, like it's burning the sensor basically. It's too hot for the sensor. How did I cut this out? Because obviously if I cut this out by hand, I'd have to animate it. It's a big pain. This is how I did it. So if you go in here, you'll notice that this is my depth pass, the one that I rendered out from Blender. And this is going to come in real handy if you use a Luma keyer. You'll see that the Luma keyer, you can actually go into the sliders and change what's getting cut out, what isn't. You can actually see it there on the right that it's really getting influenced. Like it sends it kind of back into the distance. I can put it behind King Kong. So if we wanted the fire to be behind King Kong, we'd just leave it there. Or if we wanted it to be right smack dab in the middle, like at the front, like the actual bridge is on fire, then you'd bring it all the way to the front. And so that's a benefit of using the depth, so you can actually use it to cut things out. It makes it a lot easier than actually creating masks, so you can just create a mask on the fly. And so the next step was to add 2 of these layers. So you've noticed that I skipped one and I went to the second one here. It's because I added 2 of these and I just put them in different spots. This one's kind of up here and this one is a lot larger, so I've masked it and just put it right down here. Also use the luma keyer to kind of cut that out, so make sure that it doesn't go on top of the bridge. Okay, so I used the glow on them as well. That way they really pop. Because if you have a look, without it just kind of dies down a little bit. You could use a standard glow that DaVinci has, it's just not as good. It doesn't have the right options that you need for this. So after that, what I've done is I've actually added a background that's orange. That way I've just created kind of like this glow for this bottom part of the image. And I'm able to kind of like give it the same color as what's coming off here, kind of like a spill. And we want there to be some spillover because now it's all bouncing off King Kong, so you need that kind of like there's something connecting this to the fire. So now we're moving into the smoke elements, and you'll see behind King Kong I've added smoke. So as you can see, I'm pretty certain this is from Pexels as well, so you're able to use these with whatever you want. So now I've got another 3 layers of that. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and you'll see that I've actually added like kind of like a light wisp of smoke here, just so it looks like it's actually coming out of the fire. You can't actually see the smoke, but it kind of, it's there when it's playing back. You'll understand when you see the playback. And I've added a little bit of smoke, not too dark, but just in front of his arm and also over here, just to give something here. Give it something like animated going on there. And so let's move on to what I think is probably the most important part. And the chromatic displacement, you can actually download that from Reactor as well as the heat distortions. I'll zoom in as much as I can. You saw that switch? Okay, so it gives it that heat distortion, like when you're looking at a really hot road in the distance, you kind of see that heat dispersion. So it'll give it that. So just make sure that you mask that and put it in front of like where you want it to. So I wanted it to be right in front of him, so this building looks like it's going up in flames, or it's about to go up in flames. And then from then on, we go to the vector motion blur. So that's going to add that nice motion blur that we need. So I do have a vignette there, but it's very light and you can't really even tell. So I'll show you what this heat dispersion looks like. So as you can tell, the fire kind of works its way through it even has it here actually. This has a lot of heat dispersion as well. And so you can kind of tell the heat haze coming out of here kind of wiggles the fur around, so whatever's behind it kind of warps it, which is great. And there's a tutorial to help you actually use it when you download it, which is great. And so really it's just about stacking different things onto it to kind of give it that life, because you can't really get this out of Blender as it is. You probably could, but it would take you forever to do, and rendering would be an absolute friggin' nightmare because you'd have to render out all the volumetrics, all the fire elements. It's not really worth it. You might as well just come into DaVinci Resolve or Nuke if you're using Nuke and just use it that way. And also with the face, this one's a little bit smaller because I don't have the actual fire elements showing, but I do have like certain embers coming from the base. And I also had to light up his face a little bit because if you look at the original, it's really dark down because we have the light coming from beneath as opposed to right in the face. You can kind of see the bluish of the face. It's already there, and this is actually bouncing from that city. That way we're able to really like pick up the rest of the colors, not just the red from underneath. But yeah, my favorite thing about this is the chromatic aberration kind of really ties it together. It gives it a little bit more life. And what I've done is I've actually added that heat dissipation down here, so you can see that it's kind of, you see a little bit of chromatic aberration. You see that the hairs aren't perfect, and the reason they're not perfect is because they're kind of been moved around from the heat dissipation. And it just adds more details to your image. So you're not just looking at a perfect render out of Blender. If you're new to the channel, remember to click like and subscribe to this video. It shows the algorithm that you guys are interested in seeing more of these videos. Also, check out my Patreon if you're interested. I have a lot more Blender videos on there, a couple of AI videos as well. That way you guys can download the files that I work on. Obviously, I can't give you the 3D files that I've used in this, but I can give you the Blender file. That way you don't have to set up the compositor. That'll be all set up. And while I'm at it, I'd like to give a big shout out to my Patreons. You guys are awesome. I can't thank you enough for what you do. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a bit of a head case. It really took it out of me, to be honest. But I enjoyed it because really I've been wanting to do something like this for a while. And if this video was right up your alley, check out this next one. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it. This is Sebastian Torres, and I'll catch you guys next time.